Alrighty, we are live. Wonderful. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another live from Boys Town Parenting. My name is Gabby, joined here today with Bridget Barnes, our parenting expert, as well as two incredible special guests who are both authors from the Boys Town Press. And we are going to be talking all about how to support your autistic child, as April is Autism Awareness Month. As we go through our discussion, we will be talking all about autism and, of course, our lovely author's new book that recently came out. So we'll show that here in a little bit. And make sure you like this video. And of course, if you have any questions for us as we go through our discussion, you can leave them in the comments below. And if you're maybe watching this later after the live concludes and you have a remaining follow-up question, go ahead and leave it in the comments and we're happy to facilitate an answer and get back to you in a timely manner. So thanks for watching. We'll start here with some introductions. Bridget above me, I know many of you are probably familiar if you watch several of our other lives every month. But Bridget, please go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know who you are for any of our new viewers.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bridget Barnes. I'm the director of the Boys Town Common Sense Parenting Program here in Nebraska. I've been with Boys Town for 4 decades. Can you believe that? I just hanging around here, working on writing parenting books and making the parenting products and training thousands of parents and professionals across the country and the world. So that's who I am. And we definitely want to talk a little later about the classes, maybe toward the end of the program. Okay.
Wonderful. And then we have Dr. Rothman in the top corner. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. Thank you.
Awesome. Tell us more about yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Yael Rothman. I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist. So is Katia Fredriksen below. I did my training, my graduate school in New York, and then my postdoctoral fellowship in Washington, D.C., where I stayed on at the Children's Hospital there, and then went on to a private practice where I got to meet Katia and ended up collaborating on this amazing children's book series. I have since very recently moved to New York, where I am practicing now. And I'm a mom to 2 little guys, a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. And that's a little bit about me.
Wonderful. Dr. Fredriksen, we'll pass it on to you.
So same professional background as Yael. I was trained in the Boston area and have been living in the DC area for the past 14 years, living and working here. And I also am a mom of two girls, a little bit older than Yael's kiddos. And so we met at our practice here, and that's sort of where it all began.
Yeah. Well, tell us more. What is it like being a pediatric neuropsychologist? You know, for those watching, tell us more. What is that profession, and how did it lead you to becoming authors through the Boys Town Press?
Well, it's super cool is what it is. I'll tell you that. I had to rush coming in hot to this because I was rushing back from the office because I was sitting with a 6-year-old this morning doing testing and like playing and setting up farm animals and building with Legos and, so that. And then, but then a couple of days ago, I was working with a somewhat surly 15-year-old. I mean, we have such an interesting variety to our work. It's the kind of work that you could do your whole life and you would never be bored. Right. Which is, and I don't think there are necessarily that many professions where people could say that. Right. So what we do is we're trained as clinical psychologists. We have the specialty in this neuropsychology. Yael and I both work with the pediatric population, which is sort of through like college age kind of thing. And we don't do therapy. What we do is evaluation. So people come in to see us, they bring their children in, or as, some people in our profession work with adults, obviously self-driven adults come in themselves, bring themselves in to learn about how their brains work, how their individual profiles work, what are their profiles of strengths and weaknesses, are there any sort of diagnoses at play that it's important to be aware of, what would be helpful to support their growth and enhance their strengths and that sort of thing. And it's just really, really interesting work. And so part of what we do is once we meet with parents or teenagers or, again, adults to do our feedback meetings, we give them resources among our recommendations. And so parents very often if a child has a new diagnosis of ADHD or autism or something, parents are really eager to know how to talk to the child about that. And so we spend time talking about that. And we really like to direct them to concrete resources because, it's so important to have, you can look at, there's a narrative and pictures and a story associated with that. Something concrete that they can share with the child. And so we really keep a close eye on what's out there in terms of books and websites and all that sort of stuff. And we had there are many wonderful things out there, but we had trouble finding a books that we felt sort of presented diagnoses as a whole. A lot of books designed for children focus on a particular trait or issue or strength or whatever it is without a more comprehensive view of a diagnosis. And so that's what led us down the path to create this series.
And you started with Different Thinkers ADHD and then recently released the autism version. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When did the ADHD book come out?
Last year. It came out last year in January, and then a couple weeks ago, the autism one came out. So we're hoping to bring another one out next year.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, Dr. Rothman, do you want to go ahead and show the book and tell us more about?
I would love to.
Oh,
this whole thing? Yeah. So this was our first book, Different Thinkers ADHD. We had the same amazing illustrator for the second book, Different Thinkers Autism. And they're formatted in similar ways as well, where we start with a little bit of an introduction of who we are and what we do and what makes us experts to explain this to you and to go through this. And then we talk about some neuroanatomy and go into 3 characters who present with the same diagnosis in very different ways. And we kind of walk through their journey of strengths and challenges. We talk about the diagnosis itself, what it means, how it can present differently in different individuals. For example, in females, sometimes there's a different presentation, strengths. And then there's a part at the end where a young person can write in their strengths, their challenges, and where do they want to go from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really loved how the kids in the book, they were like regular, you showed them doing regular things like playing, baseball. They wanted to be a Greek mythology person, and they came from various different backgrounds. I really love that the kids can really see themselves in this book, not just one aspect of themselves in the book. I have a son with ADHD and I have a stepson with autism. And so when I read the book, I was very, very pleased to see how you guys laid that out for parents. So thank you for that.
Thank you. That's wonderful feedback. That's really what we were trying to do is help anybody who reads it. Hopefully they could find something that feels personal or that speaks to them individually. And we sort of just used amalgams of clients we work with, family members, friends, just people we know, and to build the characters.
Mm-hmm. And trying to support, to cancel out any misconceptions somebody might have. So that example in the autism book, that a child, an autistic child may not be interested in relationships. And one of our characters, that's their main thing that they love is their relationships, just trying to show that there's quite a spectrum and a lot of variability within the profile. But we're glad that you felt that, because that's what our intention was. Yes.
My kids are all grown up now. Wish I would have had that book like 20 years ago. But I think that, as a person working in this field, I definitely I'm going to share that with the parents that we work with in our classes and share that with them. But I was very pleased and very proud of that Boys Town published that for you guys.
Yeah.
So I love the message behind that, giving that diverse look of autism. What does it look like and how different it can be? And there's not one set way, and every child is a little different. Thank you for that message. It was really powerful to me.
Thank you. Are you familiar with that phrase, you meet one autistic individual, you only have ever met one autistic individual? That's
exactly
right. That's such a common motto. And you could say that about ADHD as well, I think, which is what made us think about the different presentations there. hearing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, you kept it really simple that I think even parents can get next to the message that you were giving and be able to explain it to their children. And it gives them a place to have those kind of conversations about their feelings and frustrations or feeling labeled in some way. So I love that that gives parents that opportunity to have that conversation with their kids.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe for those parents watching who have a child that has recently been diagnosed with autism, how could they use the book when presenting that diagnosis to their child or talking about it with them?
So we are very passionate about children hearing about how they think and learn, understanding their brain and empowering them so they can become their own best self-advocates, right? So using this book can be a very excellent part of the process. So let's say the diagnosis was just given. Was that information shared by that provider to the child? I'd find out yes or no, and then kind of go into what are the next steps. So, oh, you know how we just had this assessment and we talked to Dr. So-and-so. I have a great resource that was recommended. Let's go through it together. And you would read it together. It's meant to be interactive. There are questions at the end, like, does this ever happen to you? And trying to engage the child. And I've had kids without diagnosis who read it and still are like, no, it doesn't happen to me, but it happens to so-and-so in class. And then you have a conversation there. Or I had one child that said, no, but it happens to my mom. And like, we had a great conversation with that as well, which was really great. So, and then you can engage them in the workbook piece as well.
Mhm. Definitely. Making it interactive is huge. And we've talked about that a lot on several of our parenting lives of, kids don't like to be sat down and talked to, but talked with and engaged with. And so that is awesome that has it at the end.
I think that's a really helpful piece it's now yours. You made it your own because you can write in it. And we don't always get to write in our books, right? As kids, like we want to maybe sometimes, and we don't get to. And it's a workbook at the end where you make it individualized, and it can be a great discussion. I think, Katia, I remember one parent telling us that their child was sharing some recommendations, like things that they would like to happen or goals that the parent had never heard before until they engaged in this conversation, which was really cool to hear about.
Yeah. Well, you said earlier that relationships is one of the misconceptions that an autistic child may face or the family may face from outside factors. But what are some other misconceptions that parents should know about?
Well, one thing, that Yael alluded to previously was the whole idea of guess what, if you've met one person with X, congratulations, you've met one person with X, right? I mean, so sometimes people feel that they know exactly what they should expect when they hear a particular diagnosis. ADHD, autism, depression, whatever it is, they have a picture in their mind of what that is, and they sort of assume that's what you mean. But of course, it's very different in different people, and our understanding has just matured and become so much more sophisticated over the past few decades, as we learn more about how, for example, females may present differently than males, how kids who are brighter and don't have language or cognitive impairment may present differently from those who did. Just there's such a variability. And so that's one misconception, is that, I know what that means. I know what autism, or I don't, and maybe so if you've met one person who presents like that, then you do know how that one person does present, but it's really not something that you can sort of paint in broad stripes across other people, right? And so when we introduce a diagnosis to families, we just have to do some psychoeducation and sort of, if necessary, update their understanding of, when we were kids, sort of this was what was the conception, but these days, like, there's this greater understanding of XYZ kind of thing, right? So that's one big one, I think, that we address.
Well, what I think I hear you saying is like autism is a spectrum of intellectual abilities. You cannot, say this one kid is like every other kid. But would you say, Katia, that most kids, autistic kids, struggle with social skills and generalizing in different situations, or not?
I'd say there are themes, right? And that's what is the foundation for the diagnosis. I mean, there are themes of difficulty with regard to sort of core social skills when interacting, especially with non-autistic peers, right? So either difficulty or differences, depending on how you want to think about it. And there will be some sort of inflexibility. Oftentimes there'll be some sort of sensory piece, but the sort of the red flag sort of things that people think of, like certain repetitive behaviors or unusual interests, or we may or may not see those things, and that doesn't mean it's not autism, right? I guess is what I'm thinking of.
Like I was talking to a adult today, actually, who shared with me like, oh, that child can't be autistic. Their eye contact is appropriate. And I said, oh, actually, like, that's interesting. But what's also fascinating? Have you ever asked that child how it is to make eye contact with others? Because I did. And they shared with me that it's uncomfortable, but they do it anyway because it's required, or it's socially required. But having appropriate eye contact is actually not like a rule out, right? There's just so many different features that can come about, and more subtle understanding. So it might look like this young person is playing in the group, and then when you look a little closer, they might be kind of going from one group to the next and not being able to sustain a relationship, or not sharing so much. They're listening more. There's a lot of different moving parts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does a parenting approach affect? Of course, it doesn't cause autism, but how does it affect working with your child that might be autistic?
Well, it'll be, I mean, as with everything else, there's no single right answer, right? It's going to be very individualized. So, for example, if your autistic child is highly sensory seeking, for example, then you may want to set up a space in your home where, your child can, there's a trampoline, there are punching bags, there's a climbing wall, whatever it is, where I had a kid who just loved, she told me about how in their basement, they had this like giant bean bag, and she would just run and like throw herself in the bean bag for like half an hour. And that was her thing. Do you know what I mean? So for a kid with whom you see that sort of thing, maybe you'd set something up like that in your house, and that is really going to help that person self-regulate. Right. Maybe it's someone who is really eager to work on certain aspects of social skills, because they're like, gosh, I had a kid recently who was like, I'm actually fine with the way I am. And I was like, great. but it bothers me that sometimes I have a harder time managing group projects, like at school, when we have to work in groups. I find it stressful. Like, I'm not sure who to approach, and I'm not sure about the roles in the group, like that sort of thing. So if you have a child who is describing some distress related to something, where maybe there are some skills that could be taught around, or there's some, you could request the school offer some additional structure around those sorts of learning opportunities, right? So there are really lots of different things, and it'll depend so much on the individual.
I think structure and routine and consistency can be something that often is helpful for individuals, many children out there. That could be in the form of visual schedules, a family calendar, knowing what's coming next, and giving warnings for changes can be a helpful experience for many. Was one thing that came to my mind in supporting your child. I was also thinking for like a younger child, if the child does want a play date and does want relationships, but is struggling because of rigidity or compromise on those play dates and relationships, you can also think about how to structure a play date, make it short. So you have an agenda for the play date. Okay, so your friend's going to come over. What do you think we should play with first? Okay, how about if they're not so interested in that? Okay, cool. So we have a few options there, and then we'll have a snack, and then they're going to go home. And then, so you make it short, structured, so it ends in a good way. Like, you know exactly what's going to happen. It's short, and it's a positive experience for everybody.
Yeah, a girlfriend of mine, we got together and she's a specialist in this area and she was working with autistic children. And so I went with her and we would take them, they would have a friend group and we would take them to the park and we would structure everything. We really had to, all of them kind of interacted differently, but they just were so happy to be around other kids and to play and to be kids for a few moments. But we had to have it really structured so they could get through it. So I agree with you on that, Dr. Rothman, that structure is important, but giving them the freedom to play the way that they feel comfortable playing was also good, and giving them the, the space to do that. So I
Right.
wish I would have had your book then. That would have been great for me.
That access, I mean, the outdoors, nature, that's
Mhm.
always, I mean, physical activity, like for any kid, right, is such an
Mhm.
important component to regularly have access to.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah. With some of these things that we've been talking about, I'm curious to know if a child is diagnosed with autism at a younger age and say, we said, for example, I can make eye contact, but it's rather difficult. I don't really like doing it. Can that change as they grow and maybe later on that might not be so much of a struggle, but then something else that previously wasn't is now a struggle? Like, do you notice that from your clinical experience and with parenting as well?
It's an interesting question. Well, I think definitely different things come about at different developmental stages. Like I think about the adolescents that we talk to about dating and like how that's a very different experience, right? Like figuring out if someone's interested in you, flirting, all of those pieces can be this piece of, cognitive empathy that's hard to read on somebody at times. So at the age of 4 versus the age of 16, for sure, there's going to be different things that change. Will feeling comfortable with some of these social niceties that are in the neurotypical world, will that come about? I would say that some individuals would say no, but they learn how to camouflage, like they learn how to get by, and that can be helpful and not so helpful sometimes if you're always masking and camouflaging. But Katia, what would you say there?
I was just going to piggyback on what you were saying and say that's part of why it's so important to take a really thorough history. Because parents may tell you, for example, oh, the teenage daughter, oh, she's great with XYZ socially. And then as you sort of go through the history, you learn that there was a lot of social coaching that went into that. There was a lot of sort of practice that was needed. And do you know what I mean? As opposed to someone who just intuitively did those things without the need for support. So it's just so important to really dig deep into the history and not just rely too much on what the presentation is right now.
Yeah, I think about some young adults or even older adults, autistic adults, who present in a way where you would think they're socially comfortable. And then you ask questions and they're like, yeah, I read a book that said I should smile in these business situations. So I do that. Like, that's why it's not something I'm interested in doing, but I know that that is something that you want from me.
I just had a dad tell me that the other day. I was doing an intake with the dad and the mom about the daughter who's going to be coming in, and he was talking about social sort of things that have been uncomfortable for him. And he was the CEO of some big company and had to do all these like sort of presentations and stuff. And the wife was like, but you were so comfortable doing the presentations. And he's like, that took a lot of training and a lot of effort. And that was really anxiety provoking for me, kind of thing. And she hadn't necessarily realized because he had even masked it from his spouse.
Yeah, definitely. Bridget, I'm curious to know, in your experience working with lots of parents from all over, what are some of their top concerns when a child is diagnosed and what support is offered for them?
Finding the supports that they can get to and they can afford, of course, are always concerns for parents. Another thing that they ask a lot about is how to create an environment in their own homes that could support their children with their unique needs so they can thrive. I mean, it's a scary thing for parents. I remember being in a car with my son with autism, and he was counting the poles. We were on the street, and he was counting the poles. And then we got up on the highway and there were no poles. And then it was all heck broke loose. And I learned, okay, he doesn't have language. So we played a game and the cards and we counted the cards. And when we got up on the highway, he still was focused on that. So we just used that because we didn't have you. So we did that. Today, of course, he's a grown man and he can be in a car, but I believe he's still uncomfortable with that, but he does his best to mask that and that kind of thing. So I think, it is different for every family, but yeah, how to get help, where to go is the big question, and how to create environments that help their kids thrive. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think that is access to services is going to vary so much by where you live and what's available in your area. And I think the range of providers who understand maybe the more subtle presentations of autism can be different from one provider to the next. So getting some good recommendations and referrals, we are evaluators, but not everyone needs to come to us to do a private evaluation. You can go to your pediatrician, developmental pediatrician, neurologist, psychiatrist. There's a lot of professionals that you can ask for support and help to direct you in your area to support you. And now that there's more access to virtual work, sometimes you can work with people that are not in your area, but can support the parent to work with the child as well. Because virtual work sometimes for young kids would be difficult often if there's not someone in the room with you, but they can work with the parent to help support the child. But I hear that. That's another reason why Katia and I, we started with, some social media presence to try to give evidence-based information to people there's just so much information out there that might not always be wonderful. And we wanted to, and people can't always we're not accessible to everyone ourselves. We wanted to give back and share some information out there too.
Yeah. And another thing that we talk to families a lot about is school, of course. I mean, that's where their child spends such an enormous chunk of their lives. And
Sure.
What sorts of supports might be required, interventions, what sort of environment, peer population stuff, expertise. It's, and of course it's going to vary so much depending on the child's individual needs, but that's a big chunk of the work we do is thinking of goals for education programs and that sort of thing.
And of course, we are linking several resources below. We've got the book linked. We've got Boys Town Parenting resources related to autism. So after this video, you can check all of those out and hopefully be one step closer to finding the support that you need. And with that, I do have my last question. It's kind of a loaded question, but I wanted to ask you all, during Autism Awareness Month, what is one takeaway that you would like our audience watching to get from this video?
Well, it's so hard to think of just one. but
That's a hard question.
Yeah, you did warn it was a hard question. But one that comes to mind is just that I think most of us as parents, even thinking beyond the parents of autistic children, but particularly for them as well, our kids aren't always what we expected, right? Sometimes they possess challenges we weren't expecting. Sometimes they possess strengths we weren't expecting. Sometimes there are things we were hoping for that we don't see. Sometimes we discover things that are exciting that we didn't expect. Right? I mean, just so many things that don't necessarily follow the path we had in our minds, our sort of naive, sort of forward attempts to predict how parenthood would be. And I think that's especially sort of important in the context of autism, where there are going to be just things parents weren't expecting. But just because it's not expected doesn't mean it can't end up being a really wonderful thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the first step when we talk about diagnosis is the fear of the unknown, right? Mm-hmm. And then as we sort of become more comfortable and we learn and we just figure out what things mean and maybe adjust our expectations to things that are different, but not necessarily any less good, right? Then we can sort of move forward with that, right? And so I know that's a little convoluted, but that's sort of what I would think about.
And to go along with that, thinking, and our books both kind of have the same sentiment that neurodiversity, being a different thinker, can be such an exceptional and beautiful thing, right? There are things you see differently, which is what progresses our world forward, right? The different thinkers are who invent, create, art, science, all of these different things. So there's so many aspects that can be so helpful. And we also talk about, and that doesn't mean that there aren't challenges, because the world wasn't necessarily built for a different thinker, right? So that's where we come and support and accommodate and intervene to make you feel the best that you can in the world around you.
I agree with both of those thoughts. I also think that parents need to know there's a place that you can go and people are here for you. Boys Town is a wonderful program called Common Sense Parenting that has parents who have children with autism, ADHD, all kinds of disorders, and parents who don't have anything on board, and they find common ground that their kids are kids. And if you need help, then we can get you that help with other Boys Town services, as well as outside of our Boys Town programs, through the Boys Town hotline or come to parenting.org. Get a book from the press, I think would be good as well. But whatever you do, know that you're not alone, that we're here for you, and that your child deserves to thrive and be who they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's lovely.
It's a great bottom line, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm full of those, Katia. Thank you. All right.
Well said. Well said. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Just as I mentioned, we will have the Different Thinkers Autism book linked in the comments and the description of this video, as well as our form to browse through our Common Sense parenting classes. You can enter your zip code. They're nationwide, so some of them are online, some are in person, and you can find one that's coming up near you because, as Bridget said, we're offering them all the time, and parents from all walks of life are welcome to join and learn something new and get the help you need. So thank you, ladies, so much for joining today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Have a great one. Thanks, everybody.